Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the docking procedure. Chris Hadfield is one of the best known astronauts of all time, and he had quite a harrowing story on his first space flight. During this flight, he and his fellow astronauts had the pleasure of somehow navigating a £250,000 shuttle towards a target on the Mir space station that was about the size of a coffee cup. Yeah, the most tense few minutes of their lives, I can imagine. Chris's job was to watch and communicate the speed and range information to the pilot, which is a super important job, obviously, because it's such a precise thing. There's a time window, they have to be traveling at just the right speed, and they need to be accurate. Chris explained, quote, "If you hit Mir just a little too soft, then the spring mechanisms would bounce you off." He went on to say, quote, "If you hit Mir just a little too hard, then you would break Mir in half and kill the 3 people on board. So you've got to hit it exactly right." Yeah, definitely high stakes at this point. So when the crew is about 30 feet away, their 2 sensors start telling them completely different things. One said 32 feet and the other said 20 feet. Chris said, quote, "They're either both wrong or one of them is completely wrong. Now, what do? There's nobody to ask. If the crew on board the flight deck of the shuttle don't solve this problem in the next 30 seconds, then the whole flight is bust and done." Instead of panicking, however, Chris explained that he just went, quote, "back to basics." This insanely intelligent person knew the dimensions of the docking module, so he used his thumb to help him sort of eyeball the distance through a window. I mean, that alone is just wild. Apparently this helped him to figure out that they were 21 feet away, not 32. He used his stopwatch to figure out the math of how fast they were going and when the thrusters should be fired, and thankfully, he was spot on. Chris finished the story by saying, quote, "It wasn't for a few minutes before one of us looked around and said, 'Hey, we did it, we're actually here.' That was a big relief of emotion on board." Yeah, I can imagine. In our number 9 spot today, we have the gas leak. In July of 1975, the Apollo-Soyuz test project took place, which was a historic moment for both space travel as well as just for politics. This was the first joint spaceflight between the United States and the Soviet Union, and it marked the end of the space race. And while it started off extremely smoothly and was going well, this flight soon became known for an entirely different reason. On return, the 2 spacecrafts, the American one holding 3 astronauts and the Soviet one holding 2 cosmonauts, met in orbit around the Earth and docked to each other. Here the group began exchanging information, they were speaking each other's language to make communication easier, and also just as a sign of respect. Things were going amazingly considering the recent history. After 44 hours together they parted, and after a few more days they were on their descents back to Earth. During re-entry, however, a malfunction with the reaction control system, which is the system that controls the altitude, this malfunction ended up causing highly poisonous nitrogen tetroxide to enter the cabin where the American astronauts were. Thankfully, once this spacecraft landed, the cabin becomes ventilated, which gave them time to be rescued without being fatally injured. The astronauts on board were rushed to the hospital and were found to have developed a form of pneumonia that is caused from chemicals, but within weeks they all recovered and lived to tell the tale of this historic spaceflight. In our number 8 spot today, we have Mir EO-23. This is the name of a mission that was part of the Shuttle Mir space program, which was a, quote, "collaborative 11-mission space program between Russia and the United States that involved American space shuttles visiting the Russian space station Mir, Russian cosmonauts flying on the shuttle, and an American astronaut flying aboard a Soyuz spacecraft to engage in long-duration expeditions aboard Mir." During this mission, on February 23, 1997, a backup solid fuel oxygen canister ended up catching fire. This fire was in one module, but it quickly began to spew molten metal, and the crew on board was concerned that it could melt through the hull of the space station. Smoke began to fill the station, and the crew were forced to use respirators to continue breathing, but of course when it rains it pours, and some of the respirators were faulty and didn't supply oxygen. After burning for 14 minutes and the crew using up 3 fire extinguishers, the fire was thankfully put out. The smoke, however, remained thick for another 45 minutes. This was probably one of the most terrifying things that the crew went through, but this certainly was not the end of the road of struggles for these guys. Let me know down below in the comments if you want a part 2 of this video, and maybe we can cover the rest of what went wrong on this mission. In our number 7 spot today, we have Apollo 13. Definitely one of the most well-known space missions ever. Apollo 13 is famous famous for all of the most terrifying reasons. This mission was the 7th crewed mission in the Apollo space program, and it was the 3rd that was meant to land on the moon. The spacecraft launched on April 11, 1970, but the mission to land on the moon was quickly aborted 2 days into the flight after an oxygen tank in the service module failed. A quote, routine stir of an oxygen tank ignited damaged wire insulation inside it, causing an explosion that vented the contents of both the service module's oxygen tanks to space. Without this oxygen that's needed for breathing and for generating electric power, the service module's propulsion as well as their life support systems were just unable to operate. This meant that the command module systems had to be shut down in order to conserve the resources it had left for re-entry. This meant that the crew had to transfer to the lunar module as a sort of lifeboat. The lunar module was only designed to support 2 men on the moon's surface for 2 days, so Mission Control had to create new procedures so that it could support 3 men for 4 days. The crew was in for some of the most difficult times, while the ground crew worked to help bring them home alive. Safe to say everyone was as stressed out as they could possibly be. Thankfully, the crew on board the ship were returned to Earth safely, and this story, although horrifying, did wonders to restore public interest in the Apollo program. This story is one of the most famous space stories ever, thanks to the several dramatizations made about it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the STS-27 disaster. During the launch of STS-27, which took place in 1988, debris from the right solid rocket booster struck the underside of the craft, which ended up severely damaging over 700 tiles on the outside of the craft, as well as taking off one tile completely. It might not seem like a lot, but every little thing matters when you're doing something like going to space. So it's important to note that this mission was classified because of the fact that there was a surveillance satellite being launched along with it. Because of this, things had to be done a little differently, so when the crew on board sent photos of the damage back to the ground, the photos were encrypted and they were extremely low quality. Mission Control deemed the damage to be just light and shadows and told the crew to continue, much to their dismay. Once landed, it became clear that Atlantis was the single most damaged shuttle that was thankfully able to successfully land. The survival of the crew came down to basically happenstance, which is just terrifying. This was only the 2nd mission after the disaster of the Challenger, so should this one have gone fatal, we likely wouldn't have seen the continuation of the program. In our number 5 spot today, we have the organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the Space Shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume, and that is exactly why this story is so unnerving. He claimed that while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which for the record, how cool would it be able to tell a story like that? You're just orbiting Earth. While he was on this mission, he saw a quote alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was quote translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and a little bit terrifying. In our number 4 spot today, we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that he saw something that I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry, call Houston, I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I kinda believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I find it hard to believe that this person, who would likely be familiar with the parts of a spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. In our number 3 spot today, we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this though, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went on to describe the lights and said that they were in the formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up stumbling upon this bizarre situation after the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it, we're all thinking it sounds a lot like aliens. I just don't have any many other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? I swear, nothing will convince me more of aliens than an astronaut's first-hand account. In our number 2 spot today, we have glowing green. Gordon Cooper is a well-known astronaut after having flown the Mercury 9 and the Gemini 5, and in fact, he was the last American to spend time in space alone. But despite all these exciting accolades, I want to take you to May 15th, 1963. Here, he was sent off to space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey, he saw something very unsettling, a glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer questions regarding this UFO. It's even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a vocal and firm believer in UFOs, so I ask, what do you guys think it was? In our number 1 spot today, we have space music. After 4 days of space travel in 1969, the Apollo 10 astronauts, Tom Stafford, Gene Cernan, and John Young, were on the far side of the moon. We were full of curiosity over what the other side could possibly be containing, but it wasn't necessarily the discovery people were expecting. While the astronauts were taking photographs and experiencing this new to humans area, they began to hear some otherworldly music coming from their headsets, and this continued for 1 full hour. Gene is said to have exclaimed, "Boy, that sure is weird music, we're gonna have to find out about that," while John replied, "Nobody will believe us." For decades, this space music was left a complete mystery until just recently when an explanation was put forward. It is being claimed that perhaps this sound emanated from radio interference between spacecrafts. While this is a fairly reasonable explanation, not everyone is exactly convinced.
In our number 10 spot, we have the gray thing. This is a story told by an anonymous online user that claims to be an astronaut who once saw an alien in an underground US base. Take it with a grain of salt, but I wanted to include it because the story was super interesting to read. He claimed to have been traveling through a US base that he didn't want to name as there is only a number of people allowed in, and he doesn't want to be tracked. Anyways, at this base, he saw a gray person that was quite definitely not from this planet. Also, when out in space, he had seen a fleet of aircraft that he knew were UFOs, but he didn't think we had any contact with them yet. It wasn't until that moment that he realized that not only do we have contact with them, the aliens are actually already living among us. Interesting. Well, there are so many quote-unquote whistleblowers that have mentioned gray people, so this story could be true. What do you think? In our number 9 spot, we have the flying saucer. Astronaut Deke Slayton revealed in an interview in 1951 that he had seen UFOs. Technically not in space, but obviously the UFO would have come from space, so I wanted to include this one. He said that he was testing a P-51 fighter and flying at about 10,000 feet in Minneapolis when he spotted something strange in the distance. It was gray and kinda looked like a kite, but a kite wouldn't be flying this high, he thought. As he got closer, he saw that it was like a saucer, a disc. He eventually realized that it was starting to move away from him, and then as quick as a blink, it pulled about a 45-degree climbing turn and then accelerated and disappeared. You can see why I wanted to include this one. In our number 8 spot, we have UFO in orbit. Astronauts James Lovell and Frank Borman have claimed to have seen a UFO during the second orbit on the Gemini. There have been many skeptics around this claim, and they usually say that it was probably the Titan booster rocket that was at its final stage. However, Lovell has replied to this claim saying that he could also see the booster rocket nearby when he saw the UFO. The exchange initially reported went as follows. Lovell: bogey at 10 o'clock high. NASA employee: this is Houston, say again 7. Lovell: said we have a bogey at 10 o'clock high. NASA employee: Gemini 7, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting? Lovell: we have several. Actual sighting. NASA employee: estimated distance or size? Lovell: We also have the booster in sight. Ooh, well, I don't know how the skeptics got around that, but skeptics are pretty committed to believing their own narrative about life in the universe, so oh well, let's let them stay in their boring world. In our number 7 spot, we have enormous babies. There have been many reports from NASA employees of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin seeing aliens when they first arrived on the moon. Even though Buzz and Neil deny it, I'm sure they have been told to deny it, if you know what I mean. A former NASA employee by the name of Otto Binder bypassed NASA's broadcasting and picked up the following being said. NASA, what's there, Apollo 11? Response, these babies are huge, sir. Enormous. Oh my god. You wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecraft out there, lined up on the far side of the crater edge. They're on the moon watching us. Apparently, off the record, the astronauts have admitted to many scientists that they did indeed see something. Yeah, I believe it. It's silly to think that there is nothing out there. That's just, human ego, I think, to believe that we are the only intelligent life. That mixed with human fear. In our number 6 spot, we have the lights. Of course, I couldn't have a list without the strange space light phenomena on it. An entire crew at the International Space Station in 2005 witnessed a set of strange lights projecting across space. Commander Leroy Chow has commented on this strange sighting and said that the light was in a weird formation as if it were an upside down V shape. The crew and Chow saw this fleet of lights in the shape of an upside down V fly past them. It would be one thing if it were just one person, but an entire crew witnessed this. That's a lot of people that would be lying. So personally, I think that's all the proof we need, folks. There is other intelligent life out there, and they may be close by. Perhaps they're already here and running our government. You decide. In our number 5 spot, we have alien interaction. This one needed to be included on the list because it's really just suspicious. Very sus. Apparently, Scott Kelly, a well-known astronaut and most notably known for spending a very, very long time on the International Space Station, the longest an astronaut has ever spent there, actually. But anyways, Scott has been known to make quite a few jokes about the things he's seen out there, and we have to wonder, are they really jokes, or was he told not to speak his truth? He was quoted as once saying that aliens have it easier in space than we do. First off, someone's gotta teach this man what a joke is, cause it's missing a punchline. And second, what does that mean? What makes you say something like that? There must be some weird truth behind it. Anyways, I'm convinced that he's seen aliens. What about you? Let me know in the comment section below. In our number 4 spot, we have a fleet of UFOs. Allegedly, astronaut Gordon Cooper is another one who has reported seeing UFOs in space. If you haven't heard of Gordon Cooper before, then you should know that he flew both the Mercury 9 and the Gemini 5, so he's really had quite a lot of time in outer space. Apparently, he is now coming out and saying that around the time he flew for the Air Force, he saw a fleet of UFOs. Apparently, not more than 10 years later, he came across a similar scene. Allegedly, in 1963, one of them flew towards him, and to back up his statement, he has proof because it was picked up by the radar. Whoa. Also, what would be his reasoning for making this up? To gain fame? Nah. Well, I mean, it's possible, but he would have already gained some clout just by being an astronaut in space, so I feel like that's probably not likely, but anyways, I believe him. He's gone on to say that, quote, I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet and other planets. Most astronauts were reluctant to discuss UFOs. I did have occasion in 1951 to have 2 days of observation of many flights of them, of different sizes, flying in fighter formation generally from east to west over Europe. Fascinating. In our number 3 spot, we have the cylindrical object. Allegedly in 1991, a cosmonaut by the name of Musa Menarov caught a cylindrical object on film that he believed to be a UFO. The object was shiny, and in the film it swivels and flies across space. Originally, Musa thought it was something off the ship, but then after further investigation, nothing was missing from the ship. So after further reflection on seeing it and, looking back at the footage, he's convinced it was some kind of UFO ship or UFO device. What's with all the UFO objects that are so shiny? Do you think this is a UFO? Or perhaps is it something from another planet? Let us know in the comment section below. Coming up in our number 2 spot, we have the mystery hut. The ending to this made me lol so hard that I had to include it. A mystery hut was discovered by China's astronauts and people operating their U-2 moon rover. This rover was making its way through the northwestern part of the moon when it was discovered. On the camera, a cube-shaped mystery hut was captured. This was only in November of 2021. It created a spectacle. Had moon people finally been discovered? Everyone was asking themselves. By January 2022, the rover was much closer, and what did it find? Oh, just a small piece of space rock on a crater rim. The drama. Ooh, look, a mystery hut. Probably the moon men reside there. 1 month later. Alas, it is a rock. Humans are funny. In our number 1 spot, we have UFO footage. Recently in 2020, Russian astronaut, cosmonaut Ivan Wagner made a time-lapse video while orbiting space, and he claimed to have found something. Space guests, he called them. In his video, you see the curved edge of the Earth at night with a green swirl of the aura moving across the surface and several falling stars. It's such a cool video to see. Then, about 9 seconds in, you see a fleet of 5 possible UFOs. He said that because it's in a time-lapse format, you can't measure how long they were there, but in real life, it was for about 50 seconds in real life time. This video is so crazy. Honestly, even if it's not alien fleets, to see such a beautiful sight with the falling stars is just unreal. It must be incredible to be an astronaut. In our number 10 spot, we have Robin KULIN. Okay, this is a mysterious one to me. Robin KULIN was an astronaut in training at NASA and was in a special 2-year program. He outbeat 18,300 applicants and had many years of schooling and expertise to do so. So hence the reason it was such a shock for the world to learn that he just quit after a little more than a year. According to a NASA spokesperson, it was for personal reasons. Look, I've seen the movies. More than likely, knowing that NASA doesn't have a high turnover rate, Robin more than likely did not quit NASA for personal reasons. We need to get the internet detectives on this case. Did he find out a secret that disturbed him so much that he had to quit? Did he discover that they are really keeping aliens at Area 51? Who knows? My vote is for the latter. Coming up at our number 9 spot, we have MAYDAY. Not specifically NASA, but an interesting story to note from another very awesome astronaut. You may not know this, but South Korea had its very first astronaut go to space in 2008, and it was a very big deal for them. Astronaut Yi So-yin was South Korea's first and only astronaut to quit her job, but for, in my opinion, a very good reason. While on her journey home from space, she was going to find out that it would be far from smooth. She discovered that she was veering off course, which, as you can imagine, was completely scary, even though spaceships tend to be slightly off course most of the time. But in any case, they did land safely. Hooray, but they landed 260 miles off course near some shepherds in Kazakhstan. The people of the village thought that they were aliens. Even though she made history, she eventually ended up quitting and decided to go back to school in California. Imagine going out into space and then coming home and deciding to do something else. Damn, that's a life lived. In our number 8 spot, we have black holes. Black holes are fascinating. If you haven't heard of a black hole before, well, just know that they are some of the strangest and most fascinating objects in space. They're, quote, extremely dense with such a strong gravitational attraction that not even light can escape their grasp. Apparently, the Milky Way could contain over 100 million black holes, and that was where one of the first black holes was discovered in 1964. It was called Cygnus X1. NASA and Space.com have reported that, quote, astronomers saw the first signs of the black hole when a sounding rocket detected celestial sources of X-rays. In 1971, astronomers determined that the X-rays were coming from a bright blue star orbiting a strange dark object. It was suggested that the detected X-rays were a result of stellar material being stripped away from the bright star and gobbled up by the dark object, an all-consuming black hole. Yeah, that's not terrifying. I would probs quit after learning about this. In our number 7 spot, we have aliens. There has been an increasing amount of aerial phenomena, as NASA puts it, otherwise known as UFOs, in the last while, and so NASA has actually announced the assemblage of a team of scientists that will be examining this phenomena. Hooray! NASA said the focus will be on identifying available data, which is the best way to gather future data, and how it can use this information to advance scientific understanding of the issue. The chief of NASA's science unit, Thomas Zurbuchen, has said, quote, "We're looking at the Earth in new ways, and we're also looking the other way, at the sky, in new ways. What we're really trying to do here is start an investigation without an outcome in mind." Well, at least they finally admit to aliens possibly existing, and all the conspiracy theorists of the world can say to the people that downplayed all of the evidence, "Told ya." In our number 6 spot we have space music. This is allegedly from the Apollo 10 mission to space. The astronauts were checking out various equipment to see what would work in space. Of course, the stakes were high because they were actually in space, and who knows if the equipment might blow up or whatnot. But apparently, when they put on headphones connected to a speaker they were testing, they heard a strange whistling sound. They were so amused and a little unsettled by this strange music that they later called it space music. In our number 5 spot we have the space fire. Apparently, astronaut Jerry Leininger, who was stationed on the Mir space station, was just having his dinner when suddenly he discovered an extra tank of oxygen-based chemicals catch fire. Leininger said, quote, "It was a hot fire burning out of control." Apparently the fire was blocking one of the Soyuz ships that the team would have had to board in order to evacuate, so had they not put the fire out, somebody would have been left behind. Yikes, well that's a little unsettling. Thankfully, they did. In our number 4 spot we have the floating animal corpses. The thought of this is literally horrific, as I am obsessed with animals and refuse to kill even an ant, but hearing this isn't that surprising, as apparently the first living things sent to space were a monkey and a dog. Those poor babies probably had no idea what was happening until they eventually starved to death, which is just sad. Anyways, hearing this shouldn't then surprise you to hear that the corpse of the dog and monkey can be seen floating in space. Imagine seeing that and then having to go on doing what you're doing. My heart hurts. Yeah, if it wasn't already obvious that I'll never be an astronaut, well, I definitely won't be one now, knowing that I may have to stumble across this. In our number 3 spot we have shiny objects. This story is slightly unsettling, but also kind of makes you excited for future astronaut discoveries. Apparently one of NASA's astronauts by the name of Alan Bean has claimed that he saw a really shiny object on the moon. When he was asked to describe it, he said that it looked like shoe leather. You usually would assume that anything from outer space is gray or black, so to hear that there's something shiny just hanging out on the moon is so interesting. It reminds me of that kid's book where that one fish was really sparkly, the rainbow fish. Loved that book. They were never able to learn anything more, but could this be the moon's version of a diamond? Probably. In our number 2 spot we have they're watching us. Allegedly, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon in 1969, it is said that NASA lost transmission for about 2 minutes. Apparently during those 2 minutes, there was a secret message to NASA that said, "Those babies were huge, sir. Enormous. Oh God, you won't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us." Whoa. Okay, well, I am now a believer in the fact that I'm sure they did not lose transmission, and I'm sure NASA only said that so that the general employees and people watching could not hear what needed to be said. Finally, in our number 1 spot, we have a fleet of UFOs. Apparently, astronaut Gordon Cooper witnessed the most crazy thing in human history, in my opinion. Proof that our future could potentially be Star Wars in real life. He saw a fleet of UFOs. That's right. He claims to have seen it around the time he flew the Air Force. What's wild is that about 10 years later, he'd bear witness to another UFO. Also the luckiest man in history. Allegedly in 1963, a UFO flew towards him. Apparently Apparently, it was picked up on a radar too, which confirms the proof of existence and Gordon's story. Whoa. Fun fact, I once saw a floating light in the sky, and then I saw it literally zoom away at lightning speed, not lying, so I'm pretty sure I also have seen a UFO.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have an organic object. Leland Melvin is an American engineer and retired NASA astronaut who served on board the Space Shuttle Atlantis as a mission specialist. He is an incredibly brilliant man with an incredible resume, and that is exactly why this story is so unnerving. He claimed that, while on a space mission as he was orbiting Earth, which, for the record, how cool would it be able to tell a story that happened while you were orbiting Earth? It would be the only story I told for the rest of my life. But anyway, while he was on this mission, he said he saw a, quote, alien-like organic object. NASA disputed his claims and said that what he saw was just ice, but I feel like I trust the person who actually saw it with their own eyes. Leland went on to write that whatever he saw was, quote, translucent, curved, organic looking. I have no explanations to offer, but I will say it certainly is interesting and kind of terrifying. In our number 9 spot today, we have DNA difference. Scott Kelly is an engineer, a naval aviator, and a former NASA astronaut, and for his interesting discovery on this list, we have one that happened while he was in space, of course, but the results of it weren't really discovered until he was back here on Earth. Scott has a twin brother who is called Mark. While Scott was on a year-long mission aboard the International Space Station, Mark was, of course, here on Earth. Once Scott returned from his lengthy mission, him and Mark were both subjected to a 2-year-long study because, of course, since they were twins, it presented an interesting scenario. After the study concluded, NASA confirmed that 7% of Scott's genes were different. So basically, it was discovered that space changes your DNA. That's so wild, and it also makes me really wonder, even more than ever before, what other life forms out there look like then. While some of Scott's DNA expressions will change back to a closer version of what they were prior, it won't ever be 100% the same as it was before. In our number 8 spot today, we have ocean maps. Gordon Cooper had an exceptional life and career as an aerospace engineer, test pilot, United States Air Force pilot, and he was the youngest of the 7 original astronauts in Project Mercury, which was the first human space program of the United States. It truly is astonishing, and the things he was able to accomplish, and one of the things he did, led to a dark discovery right here on Earth. While Gordon was up in space orbiting Earth in 1963, he began to make some maps. This was inspired by these dark spots that he observed in the Caribbean Sea. Later, a friend of Gordon, Daryl Miklos, who is an explorer, took these maps and began searching these locations that Gordon had marked as places of interest. Daryl thought he was going to find an ancient shipwreck, but instead, he found something that continues to stump researchers and Daryl himself. He came across a very strange structure that wasn't like anything that he had seen before. This structure had long obtrusions which stuck out from the sides, and the whole thing was covered in coral, so whatever this thing is, it has been down there for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Daryl has said, quote, "There's identical formations in 3 different areas and they don't look nature-made, they don't look man-made, certainly nothing I've ever seen based on my experience, and I have years of experience at doing this. We've identified multiple different types of shipwreck material. This doesn't match or look anything like that." People have started speculating that this structure may just be the remains of a crashed UFO. If it isn't that, what else could it be? I'm feeling pretty open to suggestions. In our number 7 spot today, we have the space snake. Dr. Franklin Story Musgrave is an American physician and retired NASA astronaut, and considering how credible he tends to be, despite the absurdities of this story, it makes it hard to pass off as a lie so easily. While he was in space, he claims that I saw something I don't wish upon anyone, a sort of space snake. He said that he saw an 8-foot-long white snake floating through space. I don't even know what I would do. Probably cry? Call Houston? I'm not sure. There are many people who think that this was simply just a detached hose from the spaceship, but Dr. Musgrave remains adamant on what he saw, and to be completely honest, I believe him. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. I mean, I don't know what happens in space, but I find it hard to believe that this person, who would likely be familiar with the parts of the spacecraft, mistook a hose for a snake. Also, how would they not notice an 8-foot-long hose missing? Again, I'm certainly no astronaut, it just seems strange. In our number 6 spot today, today we have animals. It is well known that prior to human space flight becoming a thing, in order to test out what space would do to a living being, we instead sent a monkey and a dog in our place first in order to study the effects. Morally, it's not the greatest thing we've done. In fact, it's horrible, but this has gone on to have an incredible impact on our ability to research space, and the sacrifices those animals unfortunately unwillingly made has not gone on in vain. This has, however, created quite a grim situation for some astronauts. Many of the animals sent to space were sent there with no plans of survival or even recovery. Yep, that means that there are animal corpses floating through space as I make this video and as you watch it. How terrible! It has been said that unfortunately sometimes the astronauts on space missions have to encounter these grim situations, but I'm sure it makes them all the more grateful for the sacrifice and the terrible things that these animals must have endured. In our number 5 spot today we have this mysterious video. In 1991, the cosmonaut Musa Manarov was on a mission in space when he captured a video that has been raising questions ever since. I'll show the video first, and then we can discuss. Do you have any idea what that is just floating out in the middle of absolute nothingness? Well, neither do I, so we're on the same page. Whatever this shiny cylindrical object is, it has been stumping us for decades since the video was captured. There is even a CIA document that refers to this story and how strange and unexplainable it is. Maybe it's like the snake and it could just be a part of their spacecraft that had come off, but what if it's not? At this point, we may never know for sure. In our number 4 spot today, we have giant moon babies. You'd think I'm kidding, but just wait. Since the moon landing, conspiracy theorists have gone absolutely wild. Of course, we have the popular theory of how the moon landing never actually happened and that it was all shot in a studio. That's probably the most well-known one, but the one I'm about to tell you is perhaps the most terrifying and also my favorite. So this conspiracy mystery suggests that the moon landing was real, which it was. Don't get mad at me. And it starts off in 1969 after Armstrong had successfully landed on the moon. During this monumental Apollo 11 mission, NASA claims to have lost transmission for about 2 minutes, and those 2 minutes are gold for conspiracy theorists. There are people out there who believe that this quote transmission interruption is actually just a cover-up for a secret message that Neil was sending back to NASA. It is said that he said, quote, "These babies were huge, sir. Enormous. Oh god, you wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, there are other spacecrafts out here lined up on the far side of the crater's edge. They're on the moon watching us. I don't know who they are or why their babies are so big, but this is perhaps the most bizarre space conspiracy theory I have ever heard. I mean, I wasn't there, so who am I to say that Neil Armstrong didn't discover giant alien moon babies, you know?" In our number 3 spot today, we have the lights. Leroy Chiao was the commander of the ISS in 2005, and this is exactly when this strange sighting occurred. It is said that he wasn't the only one who witnessed this, however, as it is said that the entire crew was there to see this unexplainable occurrence along with him. Basically, it is said that they saw a strange set of lights while up in space. He went on to describe the lights and said that they were in a formation of an upside down V, and that they ended up just stumbling upon this bizarre situation after the formation flew past them. I'm just gonna say it, we're all thinking it. That sounds a lot like aliens. I just don't have any other possible explanations, and you're telling me that the whole crew saw it? I swear, nothing will convince me of aliens more than an astronaut's first-hand account. In our number 2 spot today, we have glowing green. Back with another Gordon Cooper story, this time it's about something he witnessed in space and only in space. On May 15th, 1963, he was sent off into space in a Mercury capsule for a 22-orbit journey around the Earth, and while on this journey, he saw something extremely unsettling. A glowing green object that would approach his capsule. During his final orbit, he did tell the tracking station of this object that was quickly approaching his capsule, and they were able to pick up this UFO on their radar, but Once Cooper landed, reporters were told that he was not allowed to answer any questions regarding this UFO. It is even more interesting considering how Gordon has been a vocal and firm believer in UFOs even before he was an astronaut. So I ask, what do you guys think this was? In our number 1 spot today we have the knock. Okay, space is a vacuum, right? So it should be silent, right? We've all heard about space roar, the alleged unsettling noise of space, but for the most part it should be relatively silent. That is exactly what makes this story the plot of a horror movie, in my opinion. Back in 2003, Yang Liwei became the first astronaut sent into space by the Chinese space program. That's an amazing accomplishment and likely a very exciting adventure, so imagine his surprise when, as he's sitting in his space shuttle, he hears a knock. He described it as, quote, someone knocking the body of the spaceship just as knocking an iron bucket with a wooden hammer. Okay, perhaps we could just chalk this up to some extremely reasonable explanation, but he's not the only one who's heard it. There were other Chinese astronauts between 2005 and 2008 who reported hearing similar sounds, and it's not like you can just open up the door to check. Next thing up, we need Ring doorbells for space shuttles, apparently.